Mumbleboxes.com, promo code CTR. All right, now, we do have to get to our special guest.
What we've all been waiting for.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
The big kahuna himself.
But before we pick him up,
There's some good news about this particular guest.
yeah.
And that is this. Affinity likes to raid in his robe. Yeah. A little red wine to help spread the bloodline. Oh, hello. I didn't see you there. Don't mind the robe. It certainly doesn't mind you.
All of his lovers are named Judy.
Welcome to Robe Talk, Scouting Report Edition, where Affinity from Blood Legion actually raids in his robe. Yeah.
So goofy. All right, let's add him to the call, shall we? Oh my gosh.
That drive you crazy.
Hello.
Hello.
Hey, there he is.
How are you doing,
Welcome
man?
aboard.
Doing okay. How are you?
I'm doing really, really well, and so glad to have you on. It's going to be awesome. I'm so looking forward to this. We talked on Thursday, so you kind of know the scoop. I will play down a sounder, give you a little intro, and off we go. Does that sound good?
Sure.
Okay, let's
Why
do
not?
it then. Why not? And here we go.
The Scouting Report.
Whoa. All right, it's time to get an in-depth look at a particular class and spec from a pro. This week, we do have a pro. He's actually in one of the top guilds in the world, Blood Legion, and he's going for that first U.S. Raw Den kill. Here, Mistweaver Monks. Affinity, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for having me. It's awesome to be on finally.
Yeah, I know. We've been talking back and forth, and it's finally time to get you in here and talk about Mistweaver Monks. It's going to be awesome. But I'm sure that the guys have some other questions for you that have nothing to do with Mistweaver Monks necessarily. Isn't that right, Solar Flay?
I do. And I love it because I said world first is world first, and you said not entirely. And why is that? Just enlighten me. I would like to know.
This is an argument that no one's ever going to be right about, right? And there's been all this drama, especially this time around, now that a 25-man guild got the world first, like final boss or whatever. But, I mean, a lot of people will always say that they're just separate races, and it's not saying that one's easier than the other. It's just saying that, it's apples to oranges. They're two totally different things. While you might consume both of them, they're still different in their own way. So it's kind of like, sure, there's this whole argument about world first is world first, which while it's true to an extent, it's still totally different. It's like,
Sure.
two different races,
I get that.
and it's crazy. It's just, there's a lot of drama on MMO Champion about it, though. I've gone through a lot of popcorn. It's pretty awesome.
But that's cool though, man. I think that's right. But so do you think, as far as recording kills go, or do you think if for any general guidelines, do you think they should add a separate 10-man and a separate 25-man ranking? Like, should that be standard?
I think they should, but it's never going to happen. I mean, if it was going to happen, it should have happened a long time ago. And, it should have basically happened before Paragon went 10-man, because no one cared about the 10-man rating scene until Paragon went 10-man. And now everyone's like, 10-man, blah, 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 Paragon, 10-man, blah, blah, blah. And it's like they really should have separated it, but it's a little too late to kind of go back on that. And I think it would end up causing a lot more drama to separate it now than it would be to just leave it be and just kind of, it is what it is.
Right.
Right, definitely.
Say, now that you guys have had a chance to experience all of the bosses in heroic modes, what do you think about this tier, and what do you think about some of the bosses? Do you have favorite encounters of yours?
Probably one of my ultimate, Lei Shen by far is one of my most favorite encounters ever, period. Like better, I would even say, than Lich King almost.
Really?
Like they've done really good with this tier. Outside of Tortoise, they've done very, very well with this tier. I know you guys were talking about that earlier.
Damn you, Tortoise!
Stupid turtle.
I mean, I like Tortoise from a healing perspective on heroic because like nothing overheals, so you're just kind of like, LOL, look at my renewing mist healing. But I mean, in general, outside of Tortoise, I think they did a really, really good job this tier. And of course, raw dead and limited attempts. Not a huge fan of that, but I mean, I feel that they've done really well, and it's frustrating that they've done this well this tier because I'm just kind of like, come on, guys. Like, what cave did you guys have these guys like locked in for the last 5 tiers? Like, where have these people been?
Right.
And I mean, I'm really happy with what they've done this tier, though. It's turned out to be an exceptional tier, minus how long it's been. But I mean,
Oh yeah.
Sure.
it's been a fantastic tier.
Well, let me-
Hang on, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Can I have a question? Okay, cool. So speaking about Raw Den, and you said you didn't like the limited attempt system. Is that just because it's a different style of takedown for you guys? You're going in, and I don't know what your approach is. You don't have to tell anything either. You're going in like 3 or 4 attempts, and then kind of discussing it. Like, are you being very conservative with your wipes, or like usually when you go up against a boss, you try and you try and you try and you pull 100 times just to get the strategy down? Is Raw Den different in that regards, or no?
It's definitely different in that regard. That's not necessarily why I dislike the limited attempts. I think if they did limited attempts well enough, then it would be okay. But I mean, I think the way that they implemented the limited attempts where they implemented them was kind of a poor decision because they made this huge emphasis to make sure that everyone was aware that Lei Shen was the final boss. Like there's multiple blue posts of people, the blue posters basically saying Lei Shen's the final boss. Raden's a bonus boss. You have to backtrack to get to him. He's got limited attempts. He's a bonus boss. Well, he sure feels like a bonus boss. His mechanics by themselves, they're nothing very spectacular, at least on the back end of Lei Shen. Like if you were going to do that one before, kind of like how Algalon died before Yogg Zero did, then it might be a little different. But I mean, they went so hard with making Lei Shen this awesome fight and making sure that you felt like that was the final boss, that it's like now that you're sitting in front of Raw Den with limited attempts, you're just kind of like, this tier's basically done for us. Like we just have this one annoyance sitting in front of us so that we can say we're done for the tier.
Yeah.
And that's the frustrating part, is you're just kind of like 30 attempts. While that's nice, you're not, slamming your head into a wall for days and hours in a week. It sucks because you're like, we killed Lei Shen. I feel like we're done.
Right. Well, let's talk about Lei Shen for just a second, because I want to get your opinion on this. You said it was the best one ever, possibly, and even the Blood Legion Twitter said that as well. What do you guys really like about the heroic Lei Shen fight?
I kind of mentioned this to you when we were talking Thursday, where Lich King, while a great encounter, the personal responsibility on that fight, kind of in a dumbed down explanation of it, was Defile, right? Like if you got Defile on you, you would run it out, you would drop it, you would get out of it. If you stood in it like a moron, it would, grow big and you would wipe the raid. So there was always that one person in your raid that you're like, please don't go on them. Please don't go on them. Please, dear God, don't go on them. And you kind of pulled the boss until it didn't go on them, and then the boss is dead. Well, Lei Shen has that mechanic, but it's all the time. Like every single person has to play well, otherwise there's a chance you're going to wipe.
Wow.
I personally made a lot of mistakes on this fight. Like I probably made some of the biggest mistakes on this encounter, and it was evident through the rest of the poll that the mistake that I made negatively influenced basically how everything else was going to go. You wanted to go into the final phase with all your reses. If you wasted a res in the first transition, well, it's likely that someone's going to make a mistake later on, and you no longer have that there.
Right.
So it's the personal responsibility within this encounter is. I mean, they haven't done that before, really. Like that much personal responsibility for all 25 or all 10 of your raiders is just crazy.
Gotcha. Well, maybe we should talk about Mistweavers.
Sure.
But I love your insights on the fight so far.
Oh, that's awesome.
Which is great. And good luck to you guys as you progress. I mean, seriously, I hope that you get Raden down like right now. That's. I want you guys to get this thing.
Well, we're good luck charms. So essentially,
Yes.
if he ever, when they kill Raw Den after this show, that means it's because of us.
Right.
Because he was on our show.
Yes.
It doesn't matter if it's months from now or today. It's still because of us. So good luck to you, sir.
Exactly. Now let's get into monks, and especially Mistweaver monks. Now there are 3 different ways to play this one spec. Is that right?
Well, I mean, there used to be your Mistweaving playstyle, which is your standard, like you cast range spells and you heal, and then there's obviously Fistweaving, which is still there, which is kind of like a Dispriest Atonement, but it's basically a gimped version of it, and you play in melee for that. And then, I mean, there used to be Zeal Weaving, but that's not really there anymore, where you would kind of maintain your Blackout Kick and Tiger Palm buffs, and then you would jab for your chi generation. But since they essentially all but broke Zeal Weaving, there really is only Mistweaving and Fistweaving now. So,
okay,
not too happy about them breaking Zeal Weaving when they did, but I understand why they ended up breaking it.
Right. Well, which style do you prefer, as far as it goes, and or which situations do you switch it up in, or how do you determine whether you're going to go Fistweaving or Mistweaving?
Fistweaving is kind of in an unfortunate spot right now, and I feel like they really, really need to sit down and rethink what they're doing with Fistweaving, because it's really kind of, at least in my perspective, it's just not really worthwhile to Fistweave much. Mm-hmm. It's one of those things that were like, damage is a huge issue on this. Like Duramu, we had some damage issues. We had many sub 1% wipes on that. Lei Shen was very, very tight initially on the phase 1 and the phase 2 transitions. So it was like I was kind of doing this hybrid, like doing a little bit of damage while not like dumping my entire mana pool into it. Mm-hmm. Type Fistweaving, and that's realistically the only time that I ever see it viable to Fistweave is if damage is that big of an issue. Otherwise, you just don't gain any benefit from it other than, it gives you something to do on a fight where you might not be healing that much.
Gotcha.
But it's so weak right now that it's just kind of like, it's there, but it's not really there. It's great for dailies. I mean,
Yeah.
You will never die doing dailies.
Yeah.
That was my biggest apprehension, though. Is I'm bars away from 90 on my Mistweaver, and I wanted to play a healer. That's why I have my Mistweaver. I didn't feel particularly, attuned to whacking things with the stick. I'm going to be able to get by, is what you're saying, by not poking things in the face, or I need to.
For raid healing and whatnot, you're never really going to Fistweave. I mean, if you want to, you can go right ahead and do it, but I mean, as far as like min-maxing your play,
and with that, you get this.
That's all I can really say about it. It's just meh.
And with that, you get this sounder.
Monk genius.
There you go. All right,
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, we have a whole bunch of sounders for you.
We got a bunch of this stuff. You're going to be hearing it all show. Our apologies.
Right.
Go on.
Like, especially like this one.
In his robe.
So you raid in your robe, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's an awesome play style. You raid in your robe and you play Mistweaver. That's awesome.
Pretty comfy.
Right. All right, let's dive into Mistweaver now. Let's just concentrate on Mistweaving. What's the play style like? What spells are you constantly using? All of those kinds of different things. Let's kind of get into the spells and the rotation or priorities that you have for Mistweaving.
The basic rundown is honestly fairly straightforward. The timing of it is probably the hardest part of the class right now. But I mean, really, all you're doing is you're throwing Renewing Mist out on cooldown. You're using Soothing Mist as your primary chi generator, and then you're dumping your chi with Uplift. And then obviously you need to kind of micro your Renewing Mist timers and how many you have out based off of Thunder Focus Tea. So if you know there's a bunch of raid damage that's going to come out in 10 seconds from now, you're going to Thunder Focus Tea and keep Renewing Mist on cooldown and Uplift and just have a whole bunch of, well, you used to have a whole bunch of Renewing Mist out, and I have I think the max you can really have is like 16 or 17.
Sure.
But really that's all there is to the rotation is Renewing Mist on cooldown, Uplift, Soothing Mist spam, and Thunder Focus Tea when you need to.
And just to break it down for those guys that may not know Mistweaver at all, you've got Renewing Mist, which is your main hot that works well with Uplift, right? And then Thunder Focus Tea will help renew all of those renewing mists and reset the timers essentially, right?
With Uplift.
Along with Uplift, yes. And then Soothing Mist, you're just spamming that.
Yeah, you're basically spamming, like, you can channel Soothing Mist, but the way that it works right now is when you cast Soothing Mist, you get 1 tick. And then it's going to tick every second after that, right?
So you kind of cheese it.
Yeah, you just cheese it and you just mash it on the global cooldown, and it's essentially it's going to double tick when you mash it on GCD. So they changed how Soothing Mist functions to where it's got an increased chance to proc if it didn't proc in the previous one. I don't remember what exactly the math is behind it, but it's just a higher chance to proc the less procs that you have. So by mashing it on GCD and getting a double tick, you basically have twice the chance of generating chi. It does cost twice as much more, but it's like 3,000 more. So it's like kind of offset by the fact that it doesn't really cost that much anyways. And that basically replaces the Zeal Weave rotation. You used to mash Jab on GCD for your chi, and now you're just mashing a channeled spell that throws your camera every which way, and you get confused on where you go, and then you roll.
That is the worst part about Mistweaving, by the way, guys. It is this whole camera switcheroo thing. I get so dizzy playing Mistweaver.
You can turn that off. There's a console command to stop the camera turn. The downside, though, is Chi Torpedo is your friend, right? Like, it's a free heal. You have loads of fun with it because you roll forward, you backpedal, you roll backwards. It's like the greatest thing ever. And you do free healing that doesn't cost any mana. But, let's say you're on, like, Duramu, for example, and you're, for whatever reason, let's say you're near the edge, right? Because Chi Torpedo rolls you really far. Mm-hmm. And you Soothing Mist someone, like, let's say you decide to Soothing Mist a range that's standing behind you, and then you don't realize that you turned your camera, and then you hit your Chi Torpedo button, and then you roll off the platform.
Right.
Or you go the wrong way, or like that's probably the worst thing about what they did with the Soothing Mist. I really hope that they remove the facing requirement, but I don't think they ever will. But the console command is the greatest thing ever. But I don't know how many times I've either Chi Torpedoed off an edge or something equally silly because
sure,
you're just not expecting to be facing that way.
Sure. Well, let's talk a little bit about some of these other spells, too, that you have. You have Surging Mist, right? All these mist spells. It's going to get confusing for those guys that don't play Mistweaver. But you have Surging Mist, which is like a bigger heal, right?
That's basically your greater heal. It's really the only big heal that we have that isn't a hot.
Right.
But it basically costs like an arm, a leg in the kitchen sink to be able to cast one of these things.
So you're not casting that a lot, right?
I basically never use it. A lot of that is because we're just not that good at tank healers. So in 10 man, you're going to have to tank heal a bit more because you have 2 or 3 healers, and that's just kind of how it goes. But in a raid setting, because there's so many healers, you can just focus on raid healing. So that's really I just never cast Surging. Because out of a select few instances, I'm just really never tank healing directly.
Right.
And because it costs half your mana pool to cast, it's just kind of like, make the paladin do that. They can do that better, and I'll still have my mana.
Right. So, basically you're saying that just the entire playstyle should be concentrating on raid healing, and that's about it, right?
Monk's toolkit really favors raid healing. Even in 10-man situations, you're still going to be a relatively strong healer for raid healing. And we have tank healing abilities, namely, Soothing on the tank, which is fine because you're using it for chi generation anyways. You can Enveloping Mist, which is our really, really big hot. It's basically a greater heal, rolled into a hot, which is nice, but it's a hot, so it's not really controllable.
Right.
That costs chi. And then we have these lovely things called healing spheres.
Oh, yeah. Talk about those.
I like to pretend that spell doesn't exist.
Do you think it's a terrible mastery design or what?
Well,
Do you not
there's the
like it?
mastery healing sphere, and then there's the healing sphere healing
Oh,
sphere.
the healing sphere. Healing
Right.
sphere. Okay.
And
Go ahead.
I mean, they both basically function the same way. I can talk about mastery first, though.
Go ahead.
I hate it.
I know, I do too.
It sucks. It's like Lightwell all over again, but on
I
steroids.
know.
It's
Yeah.
like click on the Lightwell, click on the Lightwell.
Right.
Like it's just click on the Lightwell, and now it's kind of
man.
like, do you see that little ball that's really hard to see that's on the ground 2 feet from you? Walk over that, and the DPS are just kind of like,
no,
well,
I'm
that's
not
a
going
DPS loss. You can just heal me.
to. Right.
I don't want to move.
Right.
I mean, in certain cases, it actually does a lot of healing. And if you math it out in like a 100% perfect world where your DPS aren't selfish and all they want to do is hit their DPS buttons and they walk over it or whatever, it ends up doing a lot of healing. But it's basically the only mastery in the game that you have to look at someone and go, interact with my mastery.
Right.
So it's just
Right.
like, what?
Yeah.
What? Why?
It seems like you've been
Why?
punished from priest to monk.
Yeah, and
With
like,
well, now this.
I'm just kind of like, redesign our mastery already. Like Resto Druid mastery back in tier 11, that was terrible. Terrible, because you were chasing your hots with other hots to try and benefit from your mastery, but you at least had control over that.
Right.
And then they got rid of it.
Yes.
And, happy days, they got rid of it. And now Harmony's great and dandy, but I'm just kind of sitting here on my monk going, Druid 2.0, redesign, like do something. I don't care what you do, but don't make our players have to interact with it because they're just not going to do it.
Right. Right.
They're just not. I don't care what you say. They're not. I mean, I won't even move to a healing sphere. I'm just like,
Right.
whatever.
Right. So what other kinds of spells are you using on a regular basis?
To go back into healing sphere though, I'm actually finding that I'm using it more often now than I have been in the past.
Sure.
And the reason why I haven't been using it a lot in the past is because it's kind of like mastery, except it's basically the only single target direct heal in the game that requires you to place it on the ground next to somebody. Like healing rain and things like that, like you have to place that on the ground, but that heals a lot of people and it's a really big graphic and it doesn't really involve knowing physically where everybody is on the map. But it's like if you want to tank heal with healing sphere, and it's a great spell. It's it's on a half GCD. It doesn't really cost any mana.
Right.
And I think the highest crit I saw was somewhere in like the 200Ks.
Really?
Nice.
Wow.
It does a lot of healing. But you have to know where people are, and it's like if
Right.
if you've got one tank standing on top of the other tank, and they're both low, but only one of them is actually tanking at the time. Well, the healing sphere is just going to do whatever it wants, and it might go on the other guy.
Yeah.
So it's like it's this great single target burst spell that I didn't end up using it on Lei Shen, but Nodo's was in on his monk, and he was basically filling kind of the tank heal role during phases or portions of the fight where the paladin couldn't hard cast into him, and it worked very, very well. We spend many days basically coaching the tanks on, okay, well, you can't be stacked on top of each other, and the melee can't be anywhere near you, and we're going to drop it on your face because we have to know where you're standing, and it heals you.
Right.
And it's like, it's obnoxious, and that's why I don't use it. But I've been finding myself using it a lot more because it's just it's like the strongest single target heal in the game. It's just the most obnoxious thing to have to work with.
Right. Right. I guess I got to get used to it. If I'm gonna play a monk, better get used to it.
You don't have to. I mean, it's just one of those things that it's like
You don't have to if you don't want to heal. That's fine.
It's one of those spells that if you can utilize it well, it's very good. But if you can't, it's just not worth your time. And the reason why I haven't been using it up until recently is because it's just such an obnoxious spell. It's like I said, it's like Lightwell.
Sure.
Except
Too
you
much
have to
effort for not
you
that
have to
much
know where
gain.
people are standing.
Right.
And my thing is just like, make the paladin do it. But it's an interesting spell. I wish they would change it, but it's an interesting spell.
Gotcha. Now let's talk about maybe some AOE stuff as well for heals. Are you using spinning crane kick a lot, or how do you use that? I guess.
Yes and no. It's one of those things that it's fairly situational. The biggest thing is if you time your Renewing Mist and your Thunder Focus T well enough, you're going to have a whole bunch of Renewing Mists out, and your Renewing Mist hot with your 2-piece and your Uplift is going to do the bulk healing as well as Chi Torpedoes, assuming people are stacked and you're not going to fly off a platform or something in the process. but Spinning Crane Kick is one of those things that it doesn't do a whole lot of healing, and it's technically a channeled spell, kind of. But you can move while you're doing it. But it's one of those things that, like, you want, for the most part, like, people were confused, like, on my Megara video. They're just kind of like, hang on a second, everyone's stacked. He's not using Spinning Crane Kick. He's just soothing on GCD and then uplifting. Well, because in most situations, that's better.
Right. Especially if you have all those renewing mists out, you're fine. Right.
As long as you time it well. If you don't, Spinning Crane Kick is going to be decent. It's also really nice because you can do it while moving. So if it's like a high movement, like Duramu during the maze phase and everyone's stacked up in melee range like we did, Spinning Crane Kick is going to excel in that spot because you can't stop and then mash Soothing for a couple of seconds and then carry on your way. Like you can Spinning Crane Kick and that's kind of about it. So in situations like that, it ends up being a very good spell, but Renewing Mist and Uplift is just so strong and so much of our healing that it's just kind of like, meh, whatever. Just that you'd be better spending the time spamming Soothing and Uplift rather than Spinning Crane Kick.
Right.
Speaking of, I'm sure spending your chi is largely situational, but how would you ever go about ever using Enveloping Mists? Ever, maybe?
Really only in single target situations.
Okay.
I mean, if there's a lot of people that are low and most of your Renewing Mists aren't going to overheal, your time is better spent dumping your chi into Uplift. But, I mean, if you need to tank heal or if it's a fight like Sulong where you're healing the boss or whatever, then Enveloping Mist is going to do very well.
Gotcha.
But, I mean, like I said, in a 25-man raid setting, I very seldomly look at the tank's health bar unless I really need to, and then I'll throw an Enveloping Mist into them if I know I need to. But most of the time, it's just better not spending it on Enveloping Mists.
Gotcha. What other kinds of cooldowns are you using all the time? Are you using Life Cocoon and Revival? Revival is basically just a Tranquility, right? It's instant.
Revival's Tranquility on steroids. It's like miles and miles and miles better than Tranquility because it's instant. You don't have to channel it, and on certain encounters, it clears debuffs as well, which is like really good.
Like Horadin. Second gate on Horadin. Come on, that's awesome. If you can clear everybody from that poison.
If you have to. I mean, realistically, at least in a 25-man, I'm not so sure about 10-man if you would have enough interrupts to deal with that, but you can interrupt it and stun it. So we typically don't get that in a 25-man setting, but it's
you
nice.
Don't. Right, LFR gets it all the time.
Yeah, LFR, you walk in there, you kind of go, oh, look at all these shiny debuffs of Revival, and they just kind of go away. It's really nice in that regard.
Yep.
So that's used. I use that similar to Trank. As needed, try and get it in where it makes most sense, but where I can also try and maximize it. But it's also not just all about throughput, and you want to save the cooldown just in case as well. So that's definitely there. Life Cocoon for me I have a really hard time using Life Cocoon regularly. Why? Because I played a Resto Druid for so many years, and for so many years we didn't have a tank cooldown. Right. We just healed, and that's what we did. So now it's kind of like I'm still getting comfortable with using Life Cocoon a little bit closer on cooldown. I'll usually save it for those oh crap moments, unless Rig specifically calls for tank cooldowns if he wants them. So usually I'll just hold on to it. But it's like I'm a Resto Druid at heart. I played Resto Druid for many, many years, and we just didn't have a cooldown, so it's really hard to get used to it. But Life Cocoon's a very, very, very strong cooldown because it's basically it's a lay on hands, but in an absorb form, and it has a hot portion on it. Now, the hot portion doesn't last that long because it usually gets knocked off relatively fast. But, I mean, even in like 5-mans or in a 10-man situation where you're focusing tank healing, you can throw an Enveloping Mist on the tank before you Life Cocoon them. They get the bonus healing on the Enveloping Mists and the Absorb. Right. So certain situations, depending on how you use it, it's a very strong cooldown. I'm just still not totally used to having it yet. It's still kind of foreign to me.
Right. And by the way,
Cocoon was a great movie.
That's all I'm going to say about that. Anyway... Now, how did you move over from Resto Druid to Monk? Was it pretty easy transition?
Well, okay, so long story short, I played Resto Druid in Firelands when I joined Blood Legion. In Dragon Soul, we needed a Disc Priest, so I rerolled Disc Priest. And And then going into Mists of Pandaria, I was kind of like, ooh, look at this new class. I wonder how it heals. And I just like instantly became attached to it, mostly because it was really cheesy and funny because Uplift would refresh Renewing Mist. So you would always have Renewing Mist on everybody.
Right.
But I kind of gravitated towards it and I really liked it. And it fell back to my healing roots of HOTS and preemptive healing. And Disc falls under that same category because it's all preemptive healing. But I really liked the hot portion of it and just kind of how the class was playing. And I don't play DPS. I despise DPS greatly, but
hey man,
I was really, really enjoying fist weaving and being in melee and getting to ignore ranged mechanics is the greatest thing ever. So it kind of grew on me. We knew we were likely going to want a monk because we figured they would be overpowered like Death Knights were, and I was the one that agreed to look at it, and I kind of fell in love with the class.
Yeah. Well, and I play Resto Druid as well, so it's kind of like it's a very similar healing style. It really is. I mean, other than you have to stand in melee, or you don't have to, I guess, but you do, and you can punch stuff when you want to. That's pretty cool. So it's just like it's kind of like it's like a very complex Druid healing type of situation for me, just because I'm still in transition.
Yeah, I mean, Monk is probably going to be the most similar to Resto Druid. It's really hard to compare it to any other healer because it really is its own thing, and it has its own real play style. So it's not really Druid, but it kind of is Druid in how the HOTS work. And
right.
You always have to think 10, 15 seconds ahead of the damage so that you're maximizing your throughput and things like that. But
sure. Well, now,
I just got a quick question.
Yeah,
so that's a great thing about these Mistweaver monks. When they first announced this new monk class, and they were talking, okay, and then the healing is going to be these Mistweavers. Do you think, Blizzard, they succeeded in creating a kind of brand new type of healing class like that is similar but still stands on its own?
Yeah, they did definitely. But it's evident with what they pulled from other classes. Like Firestar said, it's they pulled Atonement, but they wanted to make it melee. They pulled Holy Power from a Paladin, but made it better, and kind of a Druid to an extent with how the HOTS function. So they really I think they succeeded in pulling some of the best things from a couple of the classes, Priest, Druid, Paladin, and primarily, and really expanded upon how that works, specifically with basically making Holy Power chi, just kind of this really cool, with lots of different ways to spend your chi. I think the class has a lot of room for growth, but I definitely think they succeeded in kind of making something that felt very unique compared to other healing classes. It was kind of like when they introduced Dispriest and the Absorb concept, where that's just ridiculously unique and really strong.
Totally agree on that. Just so that we can get back into kind of the healing style and stuff like that, let's talk about pro tips for people as they're using these spells. What can you tell folks that are learning Mistweaver or that want to learn Mistweaver that will really help them max their heals, or at least max their ability to keep people alive? What are some good suggestions?
Good suggestion. The only thing that I really have is know what's going to happen before it happens, because Monk doesn't have a reactive playstyle. Outside of our single target heals, it's really kind of like if you're not thinking 10, 15 seconds ahead, then you're already behind.
Right.
So that's definitely the biggest thing is really learn your timing and where the mechanics are going to line. If you know something is going to happen in 15 seconds, plan on at the 10-second mark to Thunder Focus T Uplift, and then try and micromanage your Renewing Mist that way and try and control a little bit onto where they go. That's really the only big tip that you can give for Monk is just be ahead of the encounter. Know where things are going to go and just make sure that you're timing your Thunder Focus T properly, because if you don't, your Uplift isn't going to do as much healing as it could be.
Right. Makes sense. Maybe we should get into some of the other little fidgety things like stats. And let's talk about stats. What are the important stats that Mistweavers need to be looking out for?
Crit, little bit more crit, and haste to the haste break point. And some more crit.
Right. So it's that and maybe some spirit
No, not really. The way that Monk is right now, we're so mana efficient with Soothing Mists that as long as you have a shaman in your group and you're comfortable with where you are and you're not, using surging that much, spirit becomes less valuable. Like I'm running about 10,000-ish spirit right now, and then everything, like I'm gemming full intellect. Now that's going to depend greatly depending on your raid comp, your responsibility. Are you tank healing? Is your damage that bad that you have to fist weave, things like that? But from a pure 25-man raid healer perspective, spirit doesn't really have a place anymore. And that's kind of to do with crit, though, because crit is throughput, but it's also kind of regen because you have a chance equal to your crit strike percentage to get an additional manatee every time you would generate a manatee. So every time you spend 4 chi, you get 1 manatee. But if you have 25% crit, you've got a 25% chance to get an additional one. And that over the course of a long fight, that translates into a lot of regen as well. So that's kind of to blame for that as well, but also the fact that they're having a hard time balancing mana appropriately around just healing and just fist weaving or merging the two. So crit's really, really, really good in that regard, and spirit becomes less valuable.
Gotcha.
And intellect obviously ends up being so good because you also get crit from that as well. So it's kind of weird how that works. Sure. And then haste, we're already at the GCD. Like I think we're the only healing class that's already at the 1-second GCD by default.
Wow.
I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure. Like I'll log into my Resto Druid and I kind of go, I'm hitting my buttons and I go, I feel lagged because you're not on the 1-second GCD by default.
Sure.
So haste only has a value to specific breakpoints, and the only breakpoint that matters is renewing mist. So you've got basically 2 that you can aim for. 3141 or 3145, depending on what website you go to, or the 6141/6145 breakpoint, depending on what website you go to,
right.
Is really the only ones that are there. Sure, you can get more haste in your Soothing Mist ticks faster, but you don't get an additional tick to it. So it's kind of like haste has that value for the breakpoints, and that's it. And then there's crit. And then, obviously, as we were talking about earlier, mastery...
Yeah, definitely.
Mastery is meh.
Yeah.
No thanks.
No, that's all right. All right, let's maybe switch this into some talent talk. And what do we need to know as far as talents go for Mistweaver Monks? What are the ones that we should be using or that we need to be switching out all the time for different encounters?
I mean, the basic rundown is Chi Torpedo, Chi Torpedo, Chi Torpedo. There's a couple of situations where you wouldn't want it. Like I said, in DPS situations where DPS is tight, you can grab Zoo and White Tiger, which it's okay. Rushing Jade Wind hasn't really had a spot for a while because we don't really spin and crane kick much anymore. So it's just better to Chi Torpedo, and Chi Torpedo's free. Outside of that, the only thing you're really going to change, and you only change it once really, is going to be your tier 30 talents, which is Zen Sphere, Chi Burst, or Chi Wave. And Zen Sphere's good-ish.
Right. It's not bad for like 5-mans and stuff like that, right? I mean,
yeah, I mean for 5-mans or whatever, it's fine.
Right.
But in like raid healing situations, it's like why? It's I mean the tier 30 talents overall don't do that much healing like they used to because they're on a cooldown now. So they're a nice little bit of burst healing. Mm-hmm. But Zen Sphere has like this huge like micromanagement component involved in it, and you only gain like a couple 100k more healing than like Chi Burst in a 25-man setting. So I'm just like, whatever. And then really all you're looking at there is Chi Wave versus Chi Burst, and it's basically Chi Wave in 10-man, Chi Burst in 25-man. The only time you would really go Chi Burst in 10-man is if you know it's going to hit 6 or more people. Like you're stacked up the entire fight. Then yeah, you can go Chi Burst, but otherwise it's just like you just go Wave, you pop it on cooldown, you're good to go.
Right. So you're always popping that on cooldown.
Yeah, basically.
Okay, well then maybe we should talk about glyphs. What are some of the glyphs that you use, or what are some of the ones that we should know about for Mistweavers?
I don't change that very often. Primarily, it's basically renewing mists, which basically, like, Renewing Mist by default will jump to the closest nearby injured ally within 20 yards, I think.
Yeah.
And then the glyph just expands it to 40 yards. So there's certain situations where you might not necessarily want to use that, but it can also be seen as a hit to your throughput as well, because while you'll have more ultimate control over where your healing goes, it's not really going to bounce. You know, like if you want it all on ranged on Lei Shen in the final phase, for example, I mean, you're going to get it on ranged, but then it's going to run out of range targets, and then it's not going to jump to melee because it doesn't have ranged on the melee. Right. So you can argue for changing that one out.
Sure.
But for the most part, you basically always, I switched that out during the first boss in, God, I don't even remember the instance. I hate that instance so much. I already forgot what it was called. Whatever one Shaw was in. I don't even remember that place.
Oh, Terrace. Yeah, Terrace.
Yeah, Terrace. That's right. Yeah. And the only reason why I unglyphed that was because it was broken and it was randomly wasting all of my Renewing Mists and throwing them at Sulong that was up on Lei Shi's platform, I think.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, it was just they were just being thrown away that way. So you unglyphed it there, but I mean, for the most part, you don't really
one of the big glyphs that comes into play, I think, for the play style is the Glyph of Manatee. Now, are you using that one all the time? Okay.
Yes. I mean, you really don't want to be taking yourself out of the fight for an extended period of time. And the reason why I never use, or at least anymore, if I know mana is not going to be a huge issue, the reason why I don't use the focus potions, like where you like sit down and you're like channeling it for a while, is because we're all based on timers. As soon as you fall behind on your Renewing Mist cooldown, it essentially takes 10 to 15 seconds to get back on track so that you're Thunder Focus teeing with 6 Renewing Mists or 7 Renewing Mists out, as opposed to doing it at 4 or 5. So it's one of those things that you don't want to try and spend time channeling.
Sure.
Because it ends up being really finicky and you end up falling behind. So there's certain cases where you could technically benefit from using it. Heroic Shaw is a great example, because like you get all that free mana in the first phase from the balls on the platform, so you just like go into the final phase with 20 Manatee stacks, and if you don't glyph it, you're never going to consume all of them. So cases like that, I could argue for or against it, but I mean, for the most part, it's like I don't want to break myself out of the fight for a handful of seconds to try and channel it. So I really just mash that, on cooldown with the glyph and call it a day. And most of the time right now, I'll actually end a fight with excess Manatee stacks, but that's not because I couldn't consume them fast enough, or it might be because I couldn't consume them fast enough because my crit was just really good. But at the same time, it's like I end the fight with half of my mana bar anyways, so it's not like it's wasted.
Right.
So there's just really no reason to not have it glyphed. Right. I would rather spend a GCD every 10 seconds or whatever, rather than doing it every every 2 minutes or something and just channeling it for however many seconds you decide you want to channel it for.
Gotcha.
I was about to ask, like, do you save up? Are you using your Manatee on cooldown, or do you feel like if you're floating around like maybe 60 to 80% mana, are you going to save it up for maybe something later on down the fight when phase 3 is super raid damage or something? Do you ever not use it?
It depends on the fight. Lei Shen's the greatest example I can give on kind of hoarding my mana T stacks, to the extent where, I was basically calling 10 is my 0. Like I'm counting, I have to have 10 going into the final phase. But I mean, outside of that, unless I know that I'm really good on mana, like if I'm at 60 to 70% mana and my Resto Shaman drops his mana tide, then I'm not going to use it there. But for the most part, if I know it's not going to be wasted, then I'll just hit it on cooldown.
Gotcha.
Real men drink manatee.
Yes. All right. Let's see. What other questions do you guys have about Mistweaver monks? So go ahead, Cole.
Go ahead.
Well, it's just a random thing in that I know you use a weak auras. I was just wondering if there's any other add-ons that, I mean, this is a lot to keep up with. Is there any add-ons that you use as a Mistweaver that you recommend?
The only thing that I ever really recommend outside of, unless you're like me and you just want a really clean looking UI, is weak auras. Or tell me when, if, that floats your boat. But the amount of stuff that you can do with weak auras is it's just absurd. You can basically track all of your cooldowns. You can, track boss debuffs. You can track, your trinkets or whatever. And it's just insane how much you can do with it. And I basically live around my weak auras pack because I track everything right there, right underneath my raid frame. And I just don't need anything else to really do that.
Right.
So, I mean, outside of a customizable raid frame, which you don't necessarily need, but I think it makes things easier, is really just like a weak auras or a tell me when or something similar that really allows you to, keep track of everything you're doing, but also not distract you from your raid frames.
Right. Well, and you actually made up your own little weak auras thing for people to try out there. I know that I've tried it, and it looks actually pretty cool. It works really well. You have you have like little chi bars. You have all of your little spells that are, as far as priority goes. When you've used them, they kind of shuffle back through the deck. It's pretty cool. Where can people find that? Just so that we can throw that out there for those guys that want it.
The easiest way right now, I eventually plan on putting it on my website, but as of right now, the only way to really get it is to actually go into my stream and ask a mod or a subscriber to post the weak auras. It's just a paste bin link that has all the imports available there. But I mean that's really the easiest way to get it is off of my stream page.
Okay. And what is your stream page?
Twitch.tv/AffinityBL. It's, how do I even spell my name? Oh, God.
How do you spell it this time around?
Literally looking it up.
Yeah, I'm just like, I don't want to mess it up. Anyways, AFFINITIIBL for my Twitch username, and you can just ask for the weak auras in chat, and someone should be around to be able to link it. I'm sure I can throw a tweet out as well with another link to it, just as kind of a refresher.
It's pretty cool though. It's very slick, that's for sure. Any other questions, guys, for Affinity?
No, I think I asked all mine. Maybe okay. I got one. So, and I think you might have covered this just a little bit already with thinking ahead on your Renewing Mist and Thundering Tea, but for someone who is a freshly minted Mistweaver, what is the biggest bit of advice you could tell them?
God, outside of focusing on being ahead of the game, I don't know. I mean, I guess the biggest thing is I didn't mention Expel Harm. Free chi, basically, from that.
Right.
But a lot of it's really just keep everything on cooldown. If you can keep it on cooldown, there's probably a reason you should leave it on cooldown. So just throw everything on cooldown. Renewing Mist, Expel Harm, things like that outside of Thunder Focus Tea that you might want to use there. I mean, really the biggest piece of advice that you can really give any player, and it doesn't really matter if they're Mistweaver or not, is experience is key. Like, you can watch a guide, or you can read a guide, or you can watch someone play the video game, but at the end of the day, that doesn't really mean anything if you're not pulling the encounter yourself and just kind of getting comfortable in the role that you fill.
Yep, it's one of those things, and I'm getting to experience this now, where you basically push every button that you have all the time, and you just kind of get used to it, and you get used to this thing of thinking ahead. Druid is a lot more reactionary than a Mistweaver Monk. It's crazy.
Right. Yeah.
So I mean, it's one of those things that I'm really having to get used to coming from Resto Druid. It's like, oh wow, I have to be 5-10 seconds ahead all the time.
Yeah.
And getting into that mentality is just I think that's the biggest struggle for me, for sure. So
it's definitely a big switch.
Yeah, definitely. Anything else, guys?
My brain hurts.
I know.
This is some great stuff.
Here, I'll play this again.
Monk genius.
There we go.
Absolutely. No, this is just fantastic. I mean, covered heroic rating, all this stuff with the Mistweaver. It's just awesome. I'm a big fan of your stream as well, man. You really put out a great thing, and you're a phenomenal healer. So thank you so much for joining us.
Yes,
thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. Give you the big applause.
One other thing that I didn't really talk on, because I just think it's standard.
Sure.
Like we were talking about it earlier, you can be in melee.
Yeah.
It's the best thing about being monk. Monk is melee. If it's a spell that hits ranged or someone that's out at range rather than posted up in melee, dude, you're on a monk. Sit in melee. Ignore mechanics. You don't have to worry about wind bomb going on you or any of those other silly ranged mechanics. So that simplifies monk quite a bit because you got to pretend you're a melee DPS and pretend that there are no boss mechanics ever in the game, which is awesome.
Cool. Well, thank you once again for all of your insights, Affinity. Really appreciate you coming on the show. Cannot tell you how thrilled we are to finally get you on here. And I'm sure we'll want to get you on again as we go down the line. So
it'd be awesome. I'd enjoy that.
Yeah, please let's stay in touch as we move forward. And good luck to you on getting Raw Den down so you can kind of get back to a semi-normal life.
Yeah. Well, it's not that bad because it is 30 attempts, so we're not, raiding 12 hours a day.
Right on.
Which is awesome.
That's great.
Right.
So if we kill it tonight, it'll officially be your guys' fault.
Awesome.
Yes.
I like that.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks again, Affinity, and we'll hopefully talk to you soon.
All right, thanks.
Yep.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thanks, man.
Awesome
It's a good
guy.
interview.
Yes.
Jeez, man, that was
good.
great.
And he is...
This monk's got spunk.
That's right.
That's a good one.
Absolutely. Yeah, just awesome, man. I mean, incredibly knowledgeable, great answers, went through everything. He sounds great. It's just, gosh, phenomenal guest. Phenomenal guest.
Yes.
You just got finitied.
There we go. Going through all of them right now.
Oh, we got so many.
I know. We really do. What was another? Here's another one.
So uplifting.
So uplifting. There we go.
Right.
And the weird one that we didn't get to play. This is weird.
His robe wraps around him like a giant bear holding a tiny baboon.
No idea what that means. No idea what that means. Oh man. All right. That's just so weird.
Oh,
All right. That went so long. So we are gonna get out of here. We are. We're just gonna get out of here.
that was great, man.
We don't have any questions for the week. I mean, people sent in some questions that I personally answered and stuff like that, but
But we don't need it. You cannot top that.
I
Like,
know.
that's it. We
I know.
peaked.
That's
We
the end of the
peaked, baby.
show. That's it. That's
That's
a
it.
big guest.